Just going to say, Diana, you need very little introduction, I think. I think to anybody on the call, we should all know Diana Miles, who's CEO of the Law Society. Diana has been kind enough to be involved coming to our plenaries, I think maybe even longer than me these days. She is a very good friend to the practice and to the practicing bar. So I'll turn it over to Diana Miles.
Great, thanks, Nathan. Let me just share my screen with you all here today so that we could take a look at a few slides while I chat with you this morning. Hopefully you can see that. It says it's up. So such a pleasure to be with you again here at the plenary. I enjoy coming, and I hope that all of you and your families and your friends are managing through these continuing challenging circumstances. Today, I'm going to spend a bit of time just bringing you up to date on some developments and activities at the Law Society. And this deck that you have in front of you will be posted later. Kelly and Katie will post that for you in case you have any questions. You can dive a little bit deeper into it. There's a fair bit of detail in some of the slides, and I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. So happy to have you reach out to me later. I'm just going to focus on outcomes, mostly for 2020 today, but also talk about a few key indicators related to pandemic-specific workflow at the Law Society, where we were really required to reimagine our workflow and how we improve our interactions with our stakeholders. And as we move through this information, you'll see here how the nudge of the pandemic really moved the Law Society faster and closer to improved automation and processing, which were really additional achievements in a year where things were otherwise very disrupted. So some good news in an otherwise radically difficult situation, I would say. So I thought I'd just highlight for you to start the Law Society's corporate values. These are critically important to me and my team operationally. They set the tone for everything that we do at the Law Society, for everything that we strive to achieve in our operations on a day-to-day basis, and in particular, how we interact with our various client groups. This is who we are as a management and an operations team. It's how we wish to be viewed, and it's how we want to interact with all of our stakeholders. This past year or so, as you can imagine, our corporate value of compassion was really perhaps the most significant value that came into play for us. I think for all of us and our licensees and our stakeholders, a renewed acknowledgement of how we all have to strive to compassionately deal with one another fairly and equitably was really critical to pushing through the circumstances and being able to move forward. Along with our values of responsiveness and also being united as an operational team, I'm really incredibly proud of the results that we achieved last year, despite the circumstances that we all found ourselves in. Now, the Law Society's management team was able to work with our board to actively propose and move some really important foundational matters forward, especially administratively from a policy perspective. I've outlined for you here on the next two slides a list of accomplishments related to one of our key strategic priorities, burden reduction, and achieving proportionate applications of our regulatory activities. Now, these outcomes, and there really are quite a few of them just briefly mentioned here, are a result of a focused and significant effort to ensure that we were supporting our priorities as an organization, but in a practical and impactful way. And we proposed these changes to Convocation, and they accepted them. They approved many new protocols for positive change, despite over half of this venture term to date now being completed in a mostly lockdown pandemic emergency state. We've made great strides actually in addressing burden reduction, both internally and for our licensees. And I've listed for you on these two slides some of the more outward facing burden reduction specific items for you. Together, they will streamline Law Society policies and our administration considerably and decrease costs in the longer term for our licensees. In addition, behind the scenes, my team and I have really been reducing internal administration activities, and that's also going to benefit licensees as we move forward. And some of those will be highlighted as I move through this deck this morning. Now, many of the items that are set out in this update are now in process, and here's the remainder of this set here, and a few more have been approved in the first quarter. They're going to require some workup, some operational plans, and implementation alongside our usual daily work, but they're all in flight, and this is quite an achievement in the circumstances, and it will certainly make things easier for everyone. Now, I just wanted to spend a few minutes on our COVID-19 financial response and impacts. The pandemic required a tremendous increase in financial oversight for our operations and for our board. With over 60,000 licensees and almost 600 employees, and a number of corporate subsidiaries, of course, and about 40 plus programs and services and an eclectic variety of business lines, managing the financials of the Law Society is quite a complex effort. Some of the highlights of change management activities, specifically related to finances and managing in a crisis, included things like the implementation of a deferral of monthly payment plans for our licensees, and also a shift to lower cost interactions. So of course we had virtual venture meetings, we had no in-person activities at all at the Law Society, as was the case for all organizations. And this supported cost containment throughout the year and reduced our financial risks. Particularly given that none of us really had any idea how this pandemic was going to play out, or how business might have been impacted, or how many of our licensees would be negatively impacted by the situation. Now, the corollary to that is that we also had a significant reduction in revenues from licensee fees, from various business lines, as a result of the changes in the market and the inability to interact in person due to the pandemic. We implemented a 2021 annual fee deferral process. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. We had over 1,100 applicants apply for that deferral, and over 600 of those were lawyers. We also made some very difficult and impactful decisions for our team respecting staffing, and I believe I mentioned this to you last November. We reduced our headcount significantly and we terminated 75 people. Now, that was about 12% of our workforce. Now, that had an impact on our people and their livelihoods. It was huge, and this was very unfortunate, but it was deemed necessary in the circumstances in our efforts to manage our platforms, contain our costs, and to make sure that we had ongoing continuity of our public interest mandate in a very tenuous pandemic circumstance. Now, these significant changes put into place to manage financial risk resulted in an operational budget for 2020 that was reduced by over 10%, and that included concurrent reductions for some of our corporate subsidiaries by a similar 10%. These were all difficult financial decisions, I can assure you, but cost containment in a world where none of us knew how this crisis was going to play out was paramount. The end result was a significant reduction in the licensee fee for this year. And again, that was with an eye to reducing burdens for our licensees. Bottom line though, due to the proactive shifts and the cost containment efforts that were undertaken, our regulatory mandate activities and our finances are solid, and we're on a good footing to look at this year and next year, hopefully from a different light and not necessarily a pandemic light. So including the additional changes that happened to programs that my management team and I have been integrating the past couple of years, also through a progressive move to modernize our operations, the policy changes that I previously mentioned to you as well that the Law Society has now adopted, the fees for licensees for lawyers dropped for 2021 to $1,873. Now, this represents a reduction in the annual fee for lawyers of about $193 from 2020. And this is on top of the reduction from the year before in 2019 of $135. Contributing to those reductions, we also made proactive management decisions to streamline, automate, and create more effective business processes. Now, that started way back in 2018 when I started as the CEO. So it's been a couple of years and we've been very successful in integrating those and reducing our costs. This is also combined with the fact that we were able to reduce our compensation fund levies, which was remarkable. You'll recall that we had to increase the levy for a few years to bring it back up to the fund levels that we required due to our risks. But thanks to lower risks and also a lower claims experience, we were able to return to more historically normal levels, which is excellent. And hopefully it'll stay that way, but one never knows. And add to that our cost containment efforts taken in 2020 to actively address risk and the prolonged COVID impact. Our decrease in fees across the last 2 years has been about $328 or over 15%. Now, there's no doubt that to achieve this, particularly for the 2021 budget, there had to be reductions in program funding. That's what it takes to reduce our annual fee for our licensees. Things have to be removed or activities or funding have to be reduced. because our regulatory costs are continuing to increase as the number of licensees we oversee continues to grow, as do our complaints, our investigations, and our disciplinary activities. So just speaking of licensees and increases in numbers, quick update for you, and this is as of December 31st, 2020, information on our growing profession. You'll see here the last 5 years of stats related to the growth of licensees in Ontario. These are lawyers, and it's broken down by category of license. So the largest part of the bar that you see here, that deep purple color, represents those licensees who are practicing law and providing legal services. So whether that's in private practice or if it's an organization or government. The teal color here are those who are working, but they're not providing legal advice, and they choose to maintain their standing with the Law Society. And the fuchsia type color are those who are on a leave of some sort. So those three categories have different fee paying levels, 100%, 50%, and 25%. But you'll see here a very steady increase of about 2% every year across the last 5 years. We're just over about 9% increases in licensees across the last 5 years. Pretty steady. Now that compares to the paralegal profession, where we're seeing a slowing increase in the number of paralegals who are actively practicing and providing legal advice. So again, the deep purple color, you see it's getting smaller. We're seeing reductions now after over 10 years of regulation. So it'll be interesting to watch where the paralegal profession goes as we move forward. I'd like now just to quickly note some change activities and some revised administrative protocols across the Law Society that were, if I may say so, a positive result of the pandemic reality. Albeit they were required, our staff were required to take significant and additional work in order to make the transitions, particularly given that all of that work happened from their homes, much like the rest of us as we were all juggling life and families and illness. Our team worked tirelessly to make sure that we could support our stakeholders and our licensees by engaging in these changes on a very timely basis. So our Client Service Center, of course, is our first point of contact. And in 2020, it was an extremely busy year for us for interactions despite the pandemic. In addition to our licensees engaging with us electronically through the portal with close to 900,000 logins to that portal in 2020, the team also transitioned 100% of our regulatory applications and obligations to accessible electronic formats and electronic files. And in addition, we continue to receive and support calls into our call center from members of the public and licensees and others. Numbers were a little lower for 2020, probably because of the pandemic, the first few months of the lockdown when people were scrambling, but we still received and managed over 126,000 calls last year. And I can tell you that the call rates have increased so far dramatically for the first quarter of this year. And the pandemic did not stop consumers, unfortunately, from complaining about the services of lawyers and paralegals. So you'll see here that the level of complaints for 2020 was comparable to the 2019 results. 5,800 complaints came in against lawyers and paralegals last year. Our team made significant efforts to resolve more complaints, though, and reduced the volume of files that were transferred to professional regulation. So that enhanced triage focus resulted in 34% of those complaints being closed at this initial stage, which was over a 30% increase in the triaged and resolved and closed files from the year before. So another great result. And that's thanks to the management team's enhanced focus on ensuring appropriate proportionate regulatory responses while still actively managing our regulatory risk. And of course, our people working above and beyond from their homes to achieve new benchmarks in this regard, and taking the opportunity, if I can refer to it as an opportunity in a crisis, to implement remarkable change while still supporting the public interest that we are obligated to serve. A couple of minutes on professional development and competence. The transitions that were taken in PD&C to address licensing candidates, licensee supports and resources, and also our ongoing quality assurance activities really required significant foundational shifts in our operations. They moved to the online licensing examinations, as you know, and they changed just about everything there was to change in that licensing process to be able to enable candidates for lawyer and paralegal licensing to effectively move through all of our activities in a timely way and in a lockdown. So the shift was all accomplished in about 9 weeks, which was no small feat. We had 6,000 licensing exams written in 2020, and to date, in the end of the first quarter, over 8,000 written, despite the pandemic circumstances. We focused on ensuring that we were not holding up new licensees who were completing all of their work to become lawyers and paralegals and were looking to commence their careers. And as you can see here, the ever increasing number of new lawyers coming into the profession, 2020 was no exception. 2,730 new lawyers last year were licensed. 33% of those received their law degrees from outside of Canada. And we did see a decrease in the number of articling placements in 2020, down by about 190, not surprising given the circumstances. But we did see an uptick in the number of licensing candidates choosing to move to the law practice program to facilitate their completion of their licensing obligations. And so it'll really be interesting to see where placements go in 2021 as we continue through the pandemic. And then, of course, in 2022, when hopefully we'll perhaps be through this particular challenge. What will be interesting is how this will balance with the new world where working outside of offices and seeing clients virtually will undoubtedly impact how we prepare to become lawyers and how we continue to develop and to license practitioners and to manage competence and conduct and practice risks. So interesting activities for the future, I'm sure. Just a quick shout out from me for our amazing practice management helpline team. They did yeoman service last year, assisting practitioners to manage the enormously changed practice environment within which we all found ourselves. The team supported a 15% increase in inquiries to the practice management helpline coming from licensees in need of support. And on the continuing education side of things, it was an incredibly busy year of transitioning, of course, to virtual offerings, but it was an incredibly busy year for most practitioners who engaged heavily in education offerings when it was possible for them to do so. Now, that wasn't possible for everyone. That would be life circumstances taking hold, but certainly everyone was active. Our CPD team developed practice management resources, and they produced free COVID learning programs alongside producing the usual number of substantive programs for the year. And we had a never before attained registration high of almost 120,000 registrations. That's more than double the year before, keeping in mind that the significant percentage of those registrations were for free programs developed for licensees or put into the archived folders to support everyone's challenges and needs and learning during the pandemic. So a little bit about professional regulation while I have you today. Just to quickly highlight our core activities here for you and the volumes. Complaints were comparable to the year before. I noted that earlier, about 5,800. About 4,000 of those were transferred over to investigations in 2020. And you'll see that about close to 30% of those were transferred to discipline. That's a little higher for us in 2020. A few more files moved over. The next two slides, I always like to give you a bit of a snapshot of the breakdown of complaints that have been received and the discipline notices that have been issued by particular demographics. So you'll see here the landscape by firm size. So for lawyers, sole practitioners represent 32% of lawyers in private practice, but they represented 47% of complaints received last year and a very significant 72% of the discipline notices issued for a formal hearing. Now, these percentages drop by staggering amounts as soon as you start to look at firms of more than one licensee, where there's more support systems that may be available to manage the risks that may lead to misconduct. And by geographic location, I thought you might find this interesting as well. Looking at it from the perspective of percentages of lawyers in each of the 8 regions, you'll see here that Central East appears to be a bit of a standout for discipline notices issued last year. That's the light purple bar, is the discipline notices. On a per capita basis, they represent 10% of practicing licensees, but 18% of the disciplinary notices. We have a little bit of a standout over in the Southwest, Central South as well. So I'll leave that with you. A quick note here, and just a reminder to indicate, and perhaps not surprisingly in a pandemic crisis, the Law Society saw a significant increase in active practice assistance requests in our trustee services areas, almost double. Now, this is the Law Society's highly skilled support group that parachutes into practices when licensees and their families need our help. So if there's been a death, of a licensee or an incapacitation, for instance. Now, these are unfortunate situations that have to occur for our trustee services group to actually go in. And the good news is that licensees from across the province stepped up to assist us to find new homes for our client files in these situations. You always come through for us, and we really thank you for doing that. The continuing bad news, unfortunately, is that most of these practices and practitioners fail to have any sort of succession or crisis plan in place for such an eventuality. And that made all of these situations extremely painful for everyone involved, particularly the family members who were left behind. So just a reminder to you and all of your members in your local areas that you should have a plan for your own practice. You're the only one who can make those plans and to ensure that your survivors are able to manage after you're gone. Quick indication here of just how busy our licensees and the public were in 2020 looking things up online at the Law Society. Our website exploded with page and unique views, a tremendous uptick in traffic, including significantly more time spent reviewing our directory of licensees, looking for or looking up lawyers and paralegals. So consumers do care, and they do look you up, and they do look for regulatory history. On the next slides, and I'm not going to go through them today because it's really just about data, I wanted to leave you with some interesting overall information on the complement of lawyers in Ontario and how that's broken down by type of practice, location of practice, practice focus, and other indicators. And these are all for year-end 2020. The profile of those that we regulate and the type and the stage of their practices is a really important context within which we all work, and we make informed decisions about risk and regulatory management at the Law Society. Some interesting stats here for you. The average age of lawyers you'll see here is 49. It's actually a little bit lower over the last few years, so that's also interesting. And I'll leave those for you so you can take a look at that information at your leisure, and don't hesitate to reach out. My final comments for today, just moving forward through 2021, we'll all continue to have some challenges ahead of us, and not just the ongoing pandemic situation. I think for the Law Society, one of those will be our ability to direct resources to streamlining our systems and supporting proportionate and risk-appropriate regulatory responses in a multifaceted business environment, when each four-year term is marked by creating, reconsidering, revising our policies and our programs. My senior management team and I will be carefully monitoring impacts and prioritizing to ensure that we can meet our most critical organizational outcomes this year to support our public interest mandate and ensure that no harm comes to the public. And we'll also continue to assist legal professionals to remain viable and capable of providing high quality services by continuing to ask how we can best ensure that those we regulate are set up for success in the early years of their practices, and how we can assist them to maintain the quality of those services throughout their careers, so that we can all avoid the risks that negatively impact consumers, in turn negatively impacting our licensees, because of course we're all paying for those mistakes. And we do look forward to working with all of you throughout all of this, and to a time when, frankly, we can begin to consider next steps without a pandemic looming over us. So I'd like to thank you for your time today. If we have a few minutes, I'd be happy to take questions if there are any, but regardless, I'm always happy to hear from you, and my contact information is here on the last slide of the deck. So let me see if I can just get out of my stop share here and see if anyone would like to ask questions, or I can get out of the way and let you move on to your next speaker, whatever you prefer.
Does anybody have any questions for Diana?
It's Ted Mann here. I have no questions. It's just incredibly impressive how the Law Society was able to shift to the online world and continue to provide the services that it provides. And I was amazed by how quickly it did so and how responsive it was. So congratulations on that, Diana.
Thank you so much, Ted. I'll relay that to my team. My team just went above and beyond. I'm just so proud of everything that we managed to accomplish. And I'm really pleased that we were able to help licensees and all of you when best we could.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed the facts and figures. Are you going to be sharing that with us?
Yes, Katie and Kelly are going to post it for you later, but also just feel free to reach out to me. Happy to ship it over to you for your use, and happy to get you any other information you might need, Rosalind, anytime.
Thank you very much.
Not seeing any other questions, Diana. I want to thank you again for taking the time with us today. I also see that Sheena Weir's on the line, and Sheena has always been a friend of FOLA and somebody who actively supports the association's membership and work with the Law Society. The Law Society is always something that starts out as a terrifying thing when we're early in our practice and articling. And I think what I've learned over the years is that it's one of the greatest resources available to us, and you do a great service to us, as do all of your staff and your team, as you said. So thank you very much for coming today.